Forget what Hollywood told you. Real Wild West lawmen didn't walk into every situation with just a six-shooter on their hip and a badge on their chest. They carried an arsenal of hidden weapons, backup guns, and brutal tools designed for one purpose: survival at any cost. Today, we're counting down the 15 secret weapons that real frontier lawmen actually carried, and some of these will completely destroy everything you thought you knew about Old West law enforcement. Number 15. The Derringer Backup Pistol. The lawman's insurance policy picture. A marshal walking into a saloon packed with outlaws who'd love nothing more than to see him dead. His Colt is visible on his hip, a warning to anyone thinking about starting trouble. But what those outlaws don't see is the compact Remington over-under Derringer tucked into his vest pocket, loaded and ready to fire 241 caliber rounds at point-blank range. The Derringer wasn't just a gambler's weapon. Lawmen across the frontier carried these palm-sized pistols as their last line of defense. When you were surrounded, disarmed, or caught off guard, a Derringer could appear from nowhere and end the threat before anyone realized you were still armed. Wyatt Earp himself was known to carry a Derringer as backup during his most dangerous assignments in Dodge City and Tombstone. These tiny pistols packed devastating power at close range. The .41 caliber short round might not have had the velocity of a Colt .45, but at distances of 5 feet or less, it could punch through bone and muscle with brutal efficiency. The psychological impact was just as important. An outlaw who thought he'd gotten the drop on an unarmed lawman would face a deadly surprise when that hidden Derringer appeared. But the Derringer had serious limitations. 2 shots maximum, terrible accuracy beyond 10 feet, and a slow, fumbling reload that left you vulnerable. Still, for a lawman who needed something he could hide anywhere, from a vest pocket to a boot top, the Derringer was the ultimate backup weapon. It wasn't meant to win a gunfight. It was meant to give you one last chance to survive when everything else had gone wrong. Number 14. The sawed-off shotgun. The room clearer. Imagine the sound of a shotgun being racked in a darkened cell block. That metallic click-clack was often enough to make prisoners reconsider any escape plans they'd been hatching. But when talk failed, the sawed-off shotgun became the most terrifying weapon a lawman could deploy in close quarters. Marshals and sheriffs throughout the 1870s and 80s kept shortened double-barrel shotguns within arm's reach. These weren't the elegant sporting guns carried by wealthy hunters. They were brutal instruments with barrels cut down to 12 or 14 inches, short enough to maneuver in tight spaces, but still capable of devastating multiple targets with a single trigger pull. The stopping power was absolute. At ranges under 20 feet, a die-disc sawed-off loaded with buckshot could incapacitate 3 or 4 men in one blast. The spread pattern made aiming almost unnecessary, a critical advantage when facing multiple armed opponents in the confined spaces of saloons, jail cells, or narrow alleyways. Famous lawman Dallas Staudenmeier was known to favor a sawed-off during his violent tenure as El Paso's marshal, using it to end several gunfights before they could truly begin. Legally, there were no restrictions on barrel length during the frontier era. Lawmen could modify their shotguns however they wanted, and many took full advantage. Some cut the stock down to a pistol grip for even easier concealment under a long coat. Others kept them behind the bar in saloons where they moonlighted as peacekeepers. The drawback was obvious: range. Beyond 25 feet, the shot pattern spread too wide to be reliably lethal, and the thunderous blast and muzzle flash revealed your position to every hostile gun in the area. But for a lawman kicking down a door or defending a jail from a lynch mob, nothing matched the raw, overwhelming firepower of a sawed-off shotgun. Number 13. Brass knuckles. The silent persuader. Not every confrontation on the frontier ended with gunfire. Sometimes a lawman needed to subdue a drunk cowboy, break up a saloon brawl, or convince a belligerent suspect to cooperate without drawing his revolver. That's where brass knuckles came in, a weapon so effective at delivering compliance that nearly every frontier lawman carried a pair. These weren't decorative pieces. Frontier brass knuckles were heavy, unpolished chunks of brass or iron that turned a man's fist into a skull-crushing weapon. One solid punch could shatter a jaw, break a nose, or render a man unconscious before he hit the floor. The psychological effect was immediate. Show a troublemaker your knuckles, and most decided cooperation was a smarter choice. Bat Masterson, one of the most famous lawmen of the Wild West, was notorious for his use of brass knuckles. During his time as Marshal of Trinidad, Colorado, and later as a peace officer in Dodge City, Masterson preferred to buffalo unruly cowboys, striking them across the skull with his revolver barrel or brass-knuckled fist rather than risking a fatal shooting. This approach kept him out of legal trouble while still maintaining absolute authority. The practical advantages were undeniable. Brass knuckles were small, easy to conceal, legal to carry, and left your gun hand free. They could be slipped on in seconds and used without the noise and attention that came with discharging a firearm. In an era when every shooting meant potential legal consequences and newspaper headlines, a lawman who could handle problems with his fists earned respect and avoided scrutiny. Number 12. The boot knife, silent and deadly picture. A scenario every frontier lawman dreaded. Disarmed, hands bound, facing an outlaw who assumed the fight was over. But hidden in his boot, pressed, flat against his calf, was a double-edged blade 6 inches long. The boot knife was the ultimate secret weapon, carried by lawmen who understood that survival sometimes meant having one more trick up your sleeve, or in this case, down your boot. These weren't fancy hunting knives or decorative pieces. Boot knives were simple, functional blades designed for one purpose: saving your life when every other weapon was gone. The blade was typically thin and flat to avoid creating a bulge, with a double edge that could cut in any direction. Some featured a small crossguard to prevent your hand from sliding onto the blade during a fight, but most were stripped down to the bare essentials. Carrying a boot knife required commitment. You had to be willing to fight at arm's length, close enough to smell your opponent's breath. But in situations where stealth mattered more than firepower, where you needed to cut yourself free from ropes or dispatch a guard silently, the boot knife was irreplaceable. Several accounts from frontier newspapers mention lawmen who survived ambushes by retrieving hidden knives and fighting their way to freedom. The blade's concealment was nearly perfect. Tucked into a boot sheath, often on the inside of the calf where it wouldn't show even when sitting or walking, the knife remained completely invisible. Outlaws could pat down a lawman's gun belt, check his pockets, and even remove his coat without discovering the blade waiting in his boot. Drawing the knife, however, required practice and speed. You had to reach down, pull up your pant leg, extract the blade from its sheath, and bring it to bear, all while your opponent tried to stop you. But for lawmen who mastered the technique, that boot knife represented hope when all other options had vanished. Number 11. The leather sap, the lawman's blackjack. What looks like a simple leather pouch filled with lead shot was actually one of the most effective compliance tools ever carried by frontier lawmen. The leather sap, also called a blackjack or slapper, could render a man unconscious with a single well-placed strike while leaving minimal visible injury. For lawmen who needed to subdue suspects without killing them, the sap was indispensable. The construction was deceptively simple. A leather pouch about 8 to 10 inches long, filled with tightly packed lead shot or ball bearings, attached to a flexible leather handle. The weight concentrated at the striking end delivered devastating force, while the flexible construction allowed the weapon to wrap around hard surfaces like skulls and collarbones, distributing impact in a way that maximized unconsciousness while minimizing fatal damage. Lawmen in crowded towns like Abilene, Dodge City, and Tombstone carried saps as standard equipment throughout the 1870s and 80s. Wild Bill Hickok was known to carry one during his tenure as Abilene's marshal, using it to buffalo drunk cowboys who got too rowdy. The technique was simple but effective. Approach from behind or the side. Swing the sap in a short arc, targeting the base of the skull or the temple, and watch the target drop. The psychological deterrent was powerful. Troublemakers who'd seen someone get sapped knew the weapon's effectiveness. The threat of being knocked unconscious and waking up in a jail cell was often enough to secure cooperation without violence. And unlike shooting a man, which could trigger revenge attacks from friends or family sapping someone unconscious, was seen as relatively merciful law enforcement. But the sap required proximity and timing. You had to get close, strike accurately, and control the situation before other threats could intervene. A missed swing or a poorly angled strike might only enrage your target, turning a quick resolution into a desperate brawl. Still, for experienced lawmen who understood its capabilities, the leather sap was the perfect tool for maintaining order without leaving bodies in the street. Number 10. Winchester rifle and saddle scabbard, the lawman's long arm. When frontier lawmen rode out of town to track fugitives, investigate crimes, or respond to trouble at distant ranches, their belt revolver suddenly seemed inadequate. That's why nearly every mounted lawman kept a Winchester lever-action rifle in his saddle scabbard, ready to deliver accurate, devastating firepower at ranges where a handgun became little more than an expensive noisemaker. The Winchester Model 1873, chambered in .44-40, was the overwhelming favorite. It offered 15 rounds of ammunition, the same cartridge used in many Colt revolvers, allowing lawmen to carry one type of ammunition for both weapons. The lever action was fast, reliable, and accurate out to several hundred yards, turning a lawman into a genuine threat at distances that left outlaws armed only with revolvers completely outmatched. Pat Garrett, the lawman who killed Billy the Kid, relied heavily on his Winchester during the manhunt. The rifle allowed him to engage targets at ranges where his revolver would have been useless, and its rapid-fire capability meant he could suppress multiple opponents while maintaining cover. This tactical advantage proved decisive in numerous frontier confrontations where lawmen faced numerical disadvantages. The saddle scabbard kept the rifle accessible but secure. Positioned on the right side of the saddle, angled forward, a lawman could draw his Winchester with one smooth motion while dismounting or even while still mounted. The weapon stayed protected from weather and dust, critical for maintaining reliability in harsh frontier conditions. But carrying a rifle also sent a message. A lawman riding with a Winchester visible in his scabbard was announcing serious intentions. It told everyone who saw him that he expected trouble and had the tools to handle it. Number 9. Hideout sleeve gun, the ultimate concealment. Imagine a lawman walking into a meeting with known outlaws, hands raised to show he's unarmed. His gun belt is removed, his coat searched, his pockets checked. But hidden up his sleeve, held in place by a simple spring-loaded mechanism, is a small, single-shot pistol that can be dropped into his palm with a twist of his wrist. The sleeve gun was the ultimate concealment weapon, carried by lawmen working undercover or infiltrating criminal organizations. These weren't mass-produced weapons you could order from a catalog. Sleeve guns were custom-made by frontier gunsmiths who understood that sometimes lawmen needed to appear completely unarmed while still maintaining a last-resort defense. The most common design was a single-shot .41 caliber pistol, small enough to fit entirely within a coat sleeve, but powerful enough to end a threat at point-blank range. The mechanism was ingenious. A spring-loaded clip attached to the inside of the sleeve held the tiny pistol snugly against the forearm. When needed, the lawman would bend his wrist at a specific angle, releasing the spring, and the pistol would slide down into his waiting palm. With practice, the motion took less than 2 seconds and looked completely natural. Alan Pinkerton's detective agency equipped several undercover agents with sleeve guns throughout the 1870s and 80s. These operatives infiltrated outlaw gangs, gathering intelligence while maintaining a weapon that could save their lives if their cover was blown. But this ultimate concealment came with severe limitations. One shot meant you had to make it count. No reload, no second chance, no room for error. Still, for lawmen operating in situations where being caught armed meant instant death, the sleeve gun represented hope where none should exist. Number 8. Pocket revolver, the plain clothes carry. Not every lawman wore a badge openly or walked around in a gun belt. Detectives, undercover operatives, and lawmen working in plain clothes needed weapons that could be carried in regular clothing without creating suspicious bulges or drawing attention. That's where the pocket revolver came in. A small but deadly firearm that could be slipped into a pants pocket, coat pocket, or vest, and forgotten until desperately needed. The most popular choice was the Colt New Line pocket revolver, chambered in .38 or .41 caliber. These compact 5-shot weapons measured just over 6 inches in length and weighed less than a pound, making them perfect for all-day concealed carry. Despite their small size, they delivered respectable stopping power at close range, enough to end a threat before it could escalate. Frontier lawmen working in cities like San Francisco, Denver, and Kansas City adopted pocket revolvers as their primary weapons when badges and gun belts would have blown their cover or made them targets. These lawmen tracked confidence men, investigated organized crime, and worked cases where looking like an ordinary citizen was essential to success. The pocket revolver allowed them to remain armed while maintaining their disguise. The short barrel meant limited accuracy beyond 10 or 15 feet, but that matched the weapon's intended purpose perfectly. Pocket revolvers weren't meant for long-range shootouts. They were defensive weapons, designed to be drawn quickly from a pocket and fired multiple times at an attacker who'd gotten too close. The double-action trigger on many models allowed rapid fire without cocking the hammer, a critical advantage in close-quarters emergencies. Reliability was the pocket revolver's greatest strength. Unlike Derringers with their 2-shot limit or single-shot hideout guns, the pocket revolver gave you 5 chances to stop a threat. And unlike larger revolvers that were obvious and cumbersome in civilian clothes, the pocket model disappeared completely, giving lawmen the element of surprise when they needed it most. Number 7. Bowie knife, the frontier multi-tool picture. A weapon so versatile it could skin a deer, cut through rope, pry open a locked door, and disembowel a man in a single sweeping motion. The Bowie knife wasn't just a blade. It was a frontier lawman's Swiss Army knife, always within reach, legal to carry anywhere, and brutally effective in combat when firearms weren't an option. Named after the legendary Jim Bowie, who died at the Alamo, these large fixed-blade knives featured blades between 9 and 12 inches long, with a distinctive clip point and a sharp and false edge on the back third of the blade. That design made them perfect for stabbing and slashing, while the substantial weight and balance allowed for powerful chopping blows that could hack through thick leather, wood, or bone. Frontier lawmen carried Bowie knives as essential equipment throughout the 1800s. Ben Thompson, a notorious gunfighter who also served as Marshal of Austin, Texas, was known to carry a Bowie knife alongside his revolvers. The blade gave him options in situations where drawing a gun would escalate tensions unnecessarily, or where close-quarters fighting made firearms impractical. The psychological impact of a Bowie knife was undeniable. Drawing a foot-long blade sent a clear message. This fight was about to get personal and brutal. Many confrontations ended when a lawman showed his Bowie, as opponents realized the kind of close-range carnage the weapon could inflict. Unlike guns, which killed at a distance, the Bowie knife promised a savage, intimate fight that most men desperately wanted to avoid. But the Bowie also served countless practical purposes. Lawmen used them to cut through leather bindings when rescuing hostages, to pry open windows during raids, to prepare food on long tracking expeditions, and to perform dozens of camp tasks. The blade was a tool first and a weapon second, but when violence erupted at arm's length, few weapons were more devastating. The drawback was obvious. You had to close to knife-fighting range, where your opponent could grab you, tackle you, or produce their own blade. Many frontier lawmen carried Bowie knives but never used them in combat, relying instead on their psychological deterrent effect. Number 6. Cane gun. The gentleman. Lawmen's secret. Imagine a respected lawman walking through town, leaning casually on an elegant walking cane as he makes his rounds. To everyone watching, he appears refined, perhaps slightly injured, certainly no immediate threat. But hidden inside that innocent-looking cane is a fully functional single-shot firearm, ready to be deployed in seconds. The cane gun was the ultimate disguised weapon, allowing lawmen to carry firepower in situations where appearing armed would have been inappropriate or dangerous. These weren't crude improvisations. Cane guns were precision instruments, typically featuring a shotgun or large caliber pistol barrel concealed within a hollow wooden shaft. The handle contained the firing mechanism, usually a trigger that could be activated by twisting or pressing a hidden button. The finest examples looked indistinguishable from ordinary walking canes, with the barrel completely hidden until the weapon was fired. Wealthy lawmen and detectives working in more civilized frontier towns favored cane guns throughout the 1870s and 80s. Several Pinkerton detectives were known to carry cane guns while investigating cases in high society, where appearing armed would have immediately marked them as suspicious. The tactical advantage was surprise. An adversary who'd carefully avoided provoking an unarmed lawman would suddenly face a weapon they never saw coming. The single shot was typically a 20-gauge shotgun shell or a .44 caliber pistol round, enough to stop any threat at close range. But cane guns had serious limitations. One shot meant you had to make it count, and reloading was impossible in a fight. Still, for lawmen who needed to stay armed while maintaining the appearance of being a refined gentleman, the cane gun was an elegant solution. Number 5. Belly gun, the gambler's lawman rig. What do you call a lawman who works undercover in gambling halls and saloons, where wearing a visible gun belt would instantly blow his cover? You call him smart if he's wearing a belly gun, a compact revolver carried in a special waistband holster that kept the weapon completely hidden under a vest or coat, while still allowing a lightning-fast draw. The belly gun rig positioned a short-barreled revolver, usually a Colt with a 3-inch barrel, or a specially modified sheriff's model, horizontally across the front of the waistband. The holster was minimal, just enough leather to protect the trigger and keep the weapon secure, while the barrel pointed across the body. This allowed the lawman to reach under his vest or coat and draw straight out, clearing the weapon in a smooth, fast motion that looked completely natural. Lawmen working gambling establishments throughout towns like Deadwood, Tombstone, and Dodge City adopted this carry method in the 1880s. Luke Short, a professional gambler who also served as a lawman, was famous for his belly gun rig, which allowed him to maintain his gambler persona while staying armed and ready. The rig's concealment was so complete that even experienced gunfighters couldn't tell if he was carrying. The tactical advantage went beyond concealment. The belly gun rig allowed for incredibly fast draws, as fast as or faster than traditional hip holsters, because the hand traveled a shorter distance and the weapon cleared clothing more easily. And because the gun was positioned centrally, it could be drawn with either hand, a critical advantage if one arm was injured or occupied. Number 4. Remington Double Derringer, 2 shots of justice. Picture a lawman's vest pocket, seemingly empty, harmless. But tucked inside is a weapon that's ended more frontier fights than most people realize. The Remington Model 95 Double Derringer wasn't just a backup gun. It was a perfectly engineered instrument of close-range destruction that gave lawmen 2 chances to stop a threat when every other option had failed. This wasn't the crude single-shot Derringers of earlier decades. The Remington Double Derringer featured an over-under barrel configuration with 2 .41 caliber short barrels that could be fired in rapid succession. The barrels rotated on a pivot, allowing the shooter to manually switch between them if time permitted, or simply pull the trigger twice for 2 quick shots. The entire weapon measured just 4 3/4 inches long and weighed less than 11 ounces, making it genuinely pocketable. Lawmen across the frontier carried Remington Double Derringers as their ultimate backup weapon throughout the 1870s and 80s. The weapon's compact size meant it could be hidden anywhere: vest pocket, boot top, sleeve, inside a hat, even tucked into a waistband under layers of clothing. And unlike single-shot hideout guns, the Double Derringer gave you a second chance if your first shot missed or failed to stop the threat. The stopping power at close range was devastating. The .41 caliber short round delivered enough energy to punch through heavy clothing, break bones, and cause massive tissue damage at distances under 10 feet. Wild Bill Hickok was famously playing poker with a Remington Derringer in his vest pocket when he was assassinated in Deadwood in 1876, a testament to how seriously even legendary gunfighters took the need for backup weapons. Still, as a last-ditch weapon carried by lawmen who understood that survival meant having one more gun than your opponent expected, the Remington Double Derringer was unmatched. It represented insurance, a final ace up the sleeve that turned certain death into a fighting chance. Number 3. Shoulder Holster Revolver. The detective's choice. Imagine a frontier detective working a case in San Francisco or Denver, dressed like a businessman in a suit and bowler hat. He can't wear a visible gun belt without advertising his profession to everyone who sees him. But underneath his coat, suspended from leather straps across his shoulders, hangs a full-sized Colt revolver, completely hidden, yet instantly accessible. The shoulder holster was the professional detective's solution to staying armed while working undercover. The design was elegantly simple. A leather harness crossed over the shoulders and around the back, with a holster hanging under the left arm for right-handed shooters. The holster positioned the revolver vertically, grip pointing down, or horizontally, grip pointing forward, depending on the lawman's preference. A simple reaching motion under the coat retrieved the weapon, and with practice, the draw could be nearly as fast as from a hip holster. Alan Pinkerton's detective agency pioneered the use of shoulder holsters for frontier law enforcement in the 1860s and 70s. Pinkerton's operatives worked cases across the American West, often operating in civilian clothes while tracking train robbers, investigating murders, and infiltrating criminal organizations. The shoulder holster allowed them to carry full-sized revolvers, usually Colt Army or Navy models, without the obvious profile of a hip-mounted gun belt. The tactical advantages extended beyond concealment. A shoulder holster kept the weapon high on the body, where it couldn't be easily grabbed by opponents in close quarters. It distributed the weight across the shoulders rather than the hips, making long days of walking more comfortable, and it kept the gun accessible even while sitting, a critical advantage for detectives spending hours at desks or in meetings. Lawmen working in frontier cities quickly adopted the shoulder holster for specific situations. When testifying in court, attending social functions, or conducting investigations where looking like a peace officer would compromise their effectiveness, they relied on shoulder rig concealment. The weapon remained completely invisible under a coat or vest, allowing them to move through civilized society while staying armed. Drawing from a shoulder holster required practice and specific techniques. The weak hand had to pull the coat aside, while the strong hand reached across the body to grip the weapon. This crossbody motion took longer than a traditional hip draw and was more complex, meaning lawmen had to drill the movement until it became second nature. A fumbled shoulder holster draw could leave you completely vulnerable, your coat pulled aside and your hand nowhere near your gun. But for detectives in plainclothes, lawmen operating in an increasingly civilized frontier, where the rough and tumble days of open gun belts were giving way to more discreet approaches, the shoulder holster represented the perfect balance between concealment and firepower. Number 2. Backup revolver in boot or ankle. The last line, picture. A lawman face down in the dirt, disarmed, beaten, his primary weapon kicked away by outlaws who think the fight's over. They're arguing about whether to kill him or leave him alive as a warning, but they've made a fatal mistake. Hidden in his boot, strapped tight against his ankle, is a compact 5-shot revolver, and the moment their attention wavers, he's reaching for it. The boot gun was the ultimate last-ditch weapon, carried by lawmen who understood that you're never truly beaten until you stop fighting. The most common boot gun was a shortened double-action revolver, typically a modified Colt or Smith & Wesson, with the barrel cut down to 2 or 3 inches and the grip shortened to reduce profile. These modifications made the weapon genuinely concealable inside a tall boot, where it rode against the inside or outside of the ankle, held in place by a simple leather strap or a custom-built holster that wrapped around the leg. Carrying a boot gun required commitment and planning. The weapon added weight to every step, and the holster had to be positioned carefully, to avoid rubbing sores during long days of walking or riding. The lawman had to wear tall boots that came up high enough to fully conceal the weapon, and he had to practice the awkward motion of reaching down, pulling up his pant leg, and drawing the revolver under stress. But that awkwardness was the point. Nobody expected a downed lawman to suddenly produce another weapon from his boot. The element of surprise was absolute, often allowing the lawman to take his first shot before his opponents even realized he was still armed. Several frontier newspapers from the 1880s recount incidents where lawmen survived seemingly hopeless situations by retrieving hidden boot guns and fighting back when their attackers assumed the conflict had ended. Number 1. The Cloverleaf, 4-shot revolver, the ultimate concealed powerhouse. The deadliest secret weapon carried by Wild West lawmen wasn't a backup derringer or a belly gun. It was a revolutionary 4-shot revolver so compact, so easy to conceal, and so devastatingly effective that it became the favorite hideout gun of lawmen across the frontier. The Colt Cloverleaf, named for its 4-chambered cylinder that resembled a 4-leaf clover when viewed from the front, represented the pinnacle of concealed firepower for frontier law enforcement. Introduced in 1871 and produced through 1876, the Cloverleaf was radically different from every revolver that came before it. Instead of the standard 5 or 6-shot cylinder, Colt designed a 4-chambered cylinder chambered in .41 caliber rimfire. This unusual configuration allowed the cylinder to be significantly smaller in diameter, while still delivering serious stopping power. The result was a revolver that measured just 6.5 inches overall, weighed only 14 ounces, and could be hidden in places where traditional 5-shot pocket revolvers created obvious bulges. Lawmen working undercover or in plain clothes quickly recognized the Cloverleaf's advantages. The weapon fit into vest pockets, coat pockets, and waistbands without creating the telltale printing that gave away other concealed weapons. Alan Pinkerton's detective agency armed several operatives with Cloverleaf revolvers, valuing their concealability for undercover work. What truly set the Cloverleaf apart was its reliability. Unlike derringers with only 1 or 2 shots, the Cloverleaf gave lawmen 4 chances to stop a threat. For lawmen who understood that staying armed meant staying alive, the Cloverleaf was insurance against the unexpected. 15 secret weapons revealing truths Hollywood never showed. Real frontier lawmen didn't rely on single 6-shooters. They carried hidden arsenals, derringers in vest pockets, boot guns at ankles, brass knuckles for compliance, Cloverleaf revolvers delivering concealed stopping power. The common thread? Preparation. Survivors trusted backup plans and concealed weapons, not luck or fast draws. They understood one gun meant death, but 3 or 4 hidden weapons meant going home alive. The real frontier was far more dangerous, clever, and brutal than Hollywood ever dared to show.